Winter, 1883, Arizona Territory. The basin stretched wide and merciless, a scar of pale dust under a pewter sky. Wind hissed through mesquite and rattled dry sage pods like bones. Somewhere far off, a freight bell moaned, slow and hollow, rolling across the flats. A woman ran there, boots shredded, shawl torn to threads, both hands bound in wire and blood. The moonlight caught on the metal around her wrists, and in that gleam her past followed close behind. Mara Keene had been running since dusk. Pain blurred the distance. She no longer knew where the ridge ended or where death began. Her breath came sharp, every gasp stinging like smoke. The wire cut deeper with each swing of her arms. She clutched her shawl to her chest, as if it could keep her alive. The land offered no mercy. Rocks bit her knees, sand burned her lungs, and the cold gnawed bone deep, but she kept moving. Behind her, the faint rhythm of hooves grew steadier. 3 riders, maybe more. Then, through the haze of moon and dust, a red glow flickered. Steady, rhythmic. A forge. Inside, Jonah Red Elk paused mid-swing. The hammer's echo felt wrong, too soft, too close, as if the earth itself had answered. He set the hammer down, stepped out into the wind, and saw a figure collapse just beyond the ridge. When he reached her, Mara lay half-buried in dust. Her lips trembled, but no sound came. He lifted her without a word, carried her into the forge, and laid her near the fire. The smell of iron and deer tallow filled the room. Jonah unwound the wire from her wrists, rinsed the wounds with cold water from a tin basin. She didn't cry out. Only her breath hitched, small and defiant. Something clinked against the floor. A small brass key engraved with the number 24. Jonah picked it up, turned it once in the firelight, and placed it on the table. When Mara's eyes opened, she saw the glow of the forge, the rough silhouette of a man sharpening a blade. Jonah asked softly, "That your blood or someone else's?" She whispered, "Both." He nodded once, as if that explained everything. Outside, the wind shifted. The sound of hooves whispered up the slope. Jonah crossed to the door, peered through a slit in the wood. "You expecting company?" Mara shook her head. "Not that kind." He blew out the lamp. Darkness wrapped them, except for the forge's red heart. Jonah leaned his rifle by the door. "You from the Keene homestead?" Mara stared at the brass key. "Used to be." "What did they want?" "My father's land. 40 acres of nothing." "Then it wasn't nothing." She closed her eyes. "They wanted a signature. I wouldn't give it." Jonah's gaze drifted to the key again. "And they took your hands for that." "Didn't take enough." He turned away, dropped another coal in the fire. Sparks hissed, small stars against the dark. "You can sleep," he said. "They won't reach here till dawn." "You sure?" "No," he said, "but the desert hides what it pities." Outside, a distant shot cracked the night, then another, then a third. Echoes rolled across the ridge, slow and heavy. Jonah reached for the rifle, thumb resting on the hammer. Mara whispered, "They found me." He looked toward the door. "No," he said. "They found here." A fourth shot rang, striking something metal outside. The sound hung in the air like a bell tolling for the dead. Jonah doused the forge, leaving only embers glowing like eyes. The desert went still, holding its breath. Dawn crept slow over Perdido Ridge, washing the forge in thin silver light. The air smelled of coal dust and frost. Mara woke to the crackle of fire and the ache pulsing through her bandaged hands. Every heartbeat throbbed against the cloth, like a hammer striking metal. She turned her head. Jonah sat nearby, sharpening a chisel with calm precision. The rhythm steadied her breathing. Her eyes wandered to the table. The key marked 24 still lay there, catching light. She stared at it, as if the number itself could tell her why men had broken her bones for it. Jonah glanced up once. "You'll live," he said. "For what?" "Whatever's left." She tried to flex her fingers. Pain answered first, then a slow stiffness. The smell of iron and deer fat clung to her skin. Jonah poured water into a cup and handed it over. She drank carefully, watching him from over the rim. "You're Apache?" "I was." "What are you now?" He looked at the forge. Quiet. Outside, the wind rattled the shutters. Somewhere below the ridge, a single horse neighed, restless. Jonah didn't flinch. He walked to the forge, pressed the bellows, and the coals brightened. Mara studied the movement, steady, deliberate, every gesture born of habit. "You live alone?" "People ruin the rhythm. I ruin it too." He half smiled. Or maybe it was just the firelight bending. "You're still breathing. That's rhythm enough." A flash of memory cut through her vision. The cellar, the iron, the smell of her own burning flesh. 10 men around her, one voice above the rest. "Sign it, girl." She hadn't. Then the world had gone white. Her voice came small. "They said they'd find me even, in the desert." Jonah reached for the tongs, lifted a strip of steel from the fire. "Then let them come. You don't even know what you're standing against." "I know fire," he said. "Burns the same, no matter who lights it." Mara tried to stand, but nearly fell. He caught her by the shoulder. The warmth of his hand steadied her. "They used nails," she murmured. "Rail nails, pressed them red hot." Jonah's gaze fell to the table, where a pile of old rail spikes lay beside the anvil. He picked one up, turned it in his fingers. "You know what they're for here?" "No." "Forging hinges, mending doors. Iron don't care what it used to be." He laid the spike into the forge. The fire hissed louder, swallowing the past with a single breath. Hours passed. Mara slept again, drifting in and out to the rhythm of hammer blows. When she woke, her hands were freshly wrapped, her body covered in a blanket that smelled of smoke and cedar. Jonah sat against the wall, eyes half closed, rifle within reach. She whispered, "Why help me?" "Because no one else will." He didn't look at her when he said it. Outside, the wind shifted. A faint clatter came from down the slope, metal striking stone. Jonah moved to the window slit, rifle low. Riders? 2, maybe 3. Then they've found me. He shook his head. They've found this place. Big difference. He turned to the fire, drew a line through the ash with the tip of a nail. If you stay, you work. Work? Keep the forge alive. Feed the flame when I'm gone. Gone? Where? To see who's hunting in my hills. Jonah took his coat, slung the rifle over his shoulder, and stepped outside. The door shut behind him, and the forge seemed to grow louder in his absence. Mara stared into the fire. The heat pulsed like memory. She reached for the nearest spike, felt its weight in her palm, then dropped it back, hissing as pain shot through her fingers. She looked at the brass key again. The number 24 shimmered in the firelight, like something waiting to open. The wind rose suddenly, pushing smoke through the cracks. Then came the sound, hooves again, closer this time, circling below. Mara stood, bracing herself on the workbench. Outside, a man's voice called out, clear and cruel, "We know she's in there." The voice echoed against the ridge. Mara's blood turned cold. She reached for Jonah's pistol on the shelf. It was heavy, unfamiliar. Her hands shook, but she held it anyway. A silence followed, too still to trust. Then the voice again, louder. "Tell the red man to hand her over. Judge's orders." Mara tightened her grip. The forge spat a burst of sparks, bright enough to light her face. She whispered to herself, "Then come take me." And from outside came the soft click of a rifle being cocked. The desert waited, breathless. Night folded over Perdido Ridge, thick as ash. The forge burned low, its red heart beating slow and shallow. Mara stood behind the workbench, pistol in her bandaged hands, trying to steady the tremor that ran through her wrists. The wind scraped across the shutters, carrying voices. 2 men, laughing under their breath. Jonah hadn't returned. The silence outside stretched thin until the hinges of the door rattled. One voice called out, "Evenin', Red Elk. Judge says you got something belongs to him." Mara froze. Her thumb brushed the pistol's hammer. The latch shifted. Jonah's voice came low from the dark corner, startling her. "Don't shoot till you see their eyes." He was there, shadow among shadows, rifle ready. The door creaked open. 2 riders stepped inside, boots heavy with dust. One carried a torch. The other kept his hand near his gun. The torchlight painted their faces, men she'd seen before, when her world had turned to fire. The first man spat. "Ain't she a sight?" Judge thought she'd be bones by now. Jonah moved closer to the forge, keeping to the edge of light. "You boys got bad directions," he said. "Not bad," the man smirked. "Paid for." Mara aimed, both hands shaking. The bandages glowed faintly in the torchlight, white against red. The second man sneered. "She's wanted for theft. Judge says she stole his deed." Jonah stepped fully into the light, calm, still. "Judge can ride up himself." The man with the torch laughed. You talk brave for someone sitting on stolen land. Jonah's eyes flicked to Mara. A silent signal. She nodded once. He swung the hammer off the anvil in one motion. The torchbearer barely flinched before the iron struck. The torch hit the floor, flames scattering like dry leaves. The second man drew, but Mara moved first. She hurled the metal brace that had once held her bones together. It struck him square in the jaw. His gun went off wild, shot punching a hole through the ceiling. Smoke filled the room. The smell of burned powder and sweat clung to every surface. Jonah kicked the gun from the man's hand, then leveled his rifle. "Drop it," he said. The man on the ground groaned. "Judge'll hang you both for this." Jonah didn't blink. He'll have to ride a long way uphill. The second man, bleeding from the jaw, spat out a tooth. "You don't get it, Indian. This ain't about her. It's what's under that land." Mara's heart skipped. She stepped forward, gun still trembling. "What's under it?" He grinned, blood running from his lip. "Not silver, something that burns louder." Jonah's gaze sharpened, but before he could ask more, the first man tried to crawl toward the door. Jonah struck the butt of his rifle into the floor beside his head. "You ride back. Tell your judge the fire's still burning." The man hesitated. Jonah chambered around without raising the rifle. That was enough. The rider scrambled out, leaving his partner on the floor. When the echo of hooves faded, only the hiss of cooling metal remained. Mara leaned against the workbench, breathing hard. "You didn't kill them." Jonah rested the rifle back on its hook. "Dead men don't carry messages." He turned to the fallen torch, stomped out the last of the flame. The smell of char filled the air. On the dirt floor, something glinted, a badge, half buried in ash. He bent, picked it up. The engraving read, "Judge Lyle Beauregard." The metal was dull, too light in his hand. He bent it easily between his fingers. Mara watched, silent. He tossed it onto the table beside the brass key. Judge's badge shouldn't bend that easy. Outside, thunder rolled far to the south. Mara looked toward the sound. "You think they'll come back?" Jonah reloaded, the click of brass crisp in the dark. "They always come back. But next time, they'll bring the man who paid them." Mara touched the badge, then the key. Two pieces of metal, one false, one heavy with meaning. "And if he comes himself?" Jonah checked the door latch. "Then we see what kind of law he brings." The forge flared briefly as the wind forced air through the cracks, lighting the key and the bent badge side by side. One shone true, the other warped in firelight. The night settled again. Somewhere beyond the ridge, 3 gunshots echoed into nothing. The morning came pale and wind-scoured. Ash still clung to the forge floor where the torch had died. Jonah shoveled the remnants out the door, the clang of metal against metal echoing across the ridge. Mara sat near the table, her hands trembling as she turned the brass key over and over in her palms. There was something new she hadn't seen before. A faint mark along its edge, a single word pressed shallow. Switch. She rubbed it clean with a corner of her bandage. The firelight caught the letters. A chill ran through her even though the forge was hot. Jonah noticed. That means something to you? She shook her head. Not yet. He poured black coffee into a tin cup and set it beside her. Drink. You'll need it. Mara looked up at him, eyes rimmed red from sleeplessness. You didn't have to fight for me. I didn't. Then why? Men like that don't stop at your door. They keep riding. She took a sip, bitter and scalding. Then what now? He leaned against the anvil. We find what that key opens. Outside, the wind cut through the valley, carrying the echo of distant hammering. Rail work, faint but steady. Mara's shoulders stiffened at the sound. My father used to say you could tell what men value by what they dig for, she said. Jonah watched the key turning in her hands. And what did he dig for? Roots, water, corn that never came up. Jonah nodded slowly. Then he wasn't the one they killed for. She said nothing. The silence between them grew heavy, full of ghosts neither named. When he spoke again, his voice was low. There's a storage yard down past mile 11. Old switch house. Used to belong to the railroad before they pulled the spur. You think that word means the place? It means something, she whispered. They branded it into me for a reason. Jonah straightened, reached for his coat. Then that's where we go. Mara looked down at her bandaged hands. I can barely hold a gun. Then hold a lantern. She stared at him, surprised by the dry hint of humor. It broke the stillness just enough to breathe. They rode out at midday, following the ridge trail toward the basin. The sky stretched wide and colorless. Dust rose behind the horses in slow spirals. Every few miles, Jonah stopped to scan the horizon. Nothing but wind and buzzards. At one bend in the trail, Mara saw black smoke curling faintly far to the east. 3 thin plumes. They're burning something, she said. Jonah squinted. Or someone. By late afternoon, they reached the skeleton of the old depot. Half-buried ties lined the ground like ribs. The switch house stood crooked against the wind, its paint long stripped away. Jonah tied the horses under the eaves. Stay close, he said. Mara stepped inside. The air smelled of dust and old grease. Sunlight spilled through cracks in the roof, striping the room with pale gold. On the far wall, a metal cabinet leaned open, empty. Beside it, stairs led down to a cellar. Jonah's boots creaked on the steps. Watch your step. Floor's soft. She followed, lantern trembling in her hand. The basement was colder than the air above, littered with rusted tools and broken rail nails. Her light swept over a heavy iron chest, half buried in the dirt. The lock plate bore the same number as her key. 24. Her breath caught. Jonah. He was already beside her, silent. She knelt, slid the key into the slot. It turned with a slow, metallic sigh. The lid creaked open. Inside lay a bundle of papers wrapped in oilskin, brittle but intact. Jonah lifted them into the light. Columns of numbers, names, and dollar amounts filled each page. At the bottom of the last sheet, Judge Lyle Beauregard. Mara stared. Bribes. Jonah flipped through the pages. And land deeds. Every acre from here to the ridge. Her voice hardened. All signed. Except mine. He looked closer at a hand-drawn map folded inside. A red line cut straight across her father's property, labeled Silver Vein 13. Jonah frowned. Silver mine? Mara shook her head. There's no silver in that ground. Then what did they bury? Before she could answer, a sound broke the stillness, the faint rattle of chains upstairs. Someone was in the building. Jonah raised a finger to his lips. They froze, listening. Another sound followed, soft but distinct, the scrape of a boot across wood. Mara whispered, "You said we were alone. I was wrong." He blew out the lantern. Darkness swallowed them both. Above, a door creaked open, spilling a line of daylight down the stairwell. The stairwell glowed faintly with dust and daylight. Jonah motioned for Mara to stay low. He climbed the steps slow, silent as smoke. A floorboard groaned under his boot, and the sound above stopped. Then came the clink of glass, the hush of someone breathing too close. Jonah pushed the door open with the barrel of his rifle. The room looked empty, just a torch guttering near the window. But the smell of whiskey lingered. On the table sat a metal cup, still warm. He scanned the floor. One set of prints, narrow, light, not boots, shoes. Mara stepped into the room behind him, lantern raised. Whoever it was, they didn't come to rob us. Jonah nodded toward the cup. They came to drink. The wind outside moaned through a crack in the siding. He crossed to the window, looked out. Down the slope, 2 horses were tied to a cottonwood, reins loose. Whoever had been here wasn't far. Mara moved to the far wall. A line of maps was tacked there, some half-torn, others drawn over with new ink. Every route pointed back toward her land. She touched one, fingers tracing the red line marked Silver Vein 13. Jonah tore the map from the wall and rolled it tight. "We take this with us." Before she could answer, a shadow passed across the doorway. A woman's voice drifted in, calm, quiet. "You shouldn't have come, Mara." Mara froze. That voice had once sung at her mother's funeral. Ruth. Her cousin stepped into the light, coat dusted gray, revolver at her hip. The look on her face was neither guilt nor hate, something colder. "I told them you'd run south," Ruth said. "Didn't think you'd crawl back to ghosts." Jonah moved between them. "You came alone?" Ruth's eyes flicked to the papers in his hand. "No one ever comes alone." Outside, a distant whistle shrieked, sharp and metallic. The ground shivered underfoot as a train clattered along the far ridge. Mara turned toward the sound. "Freight doesn't run that line anymore," she whispered. Jonah's jaw tightened. Unless someone paid to keep it running. Ruth laughed softly. "You think it's silver they're after. Silver's just the paint they use to cover steel." Mara stared at her. "You helped them." Ruth didn't deny it. "Pike promised safety. He said if I signed the claim over, they'd leave the rest of us alone." Jonah held the rifle steady but didn't raise it. He lied. Of course he lied, Ruth said. That's what men like him do. What did you think would change? Mara stepped forward, voice low. I thought blood still meant something. Ruth looked away. So did I, until it got in the way. A gust of wind slammed the door open. Papers scattered across the floor. Jonah grabbed one before it flew out. An official letter stamped with the seal of White Crown Mining Company. At the bottom, contract, Beauregard, Lyle, legal representative. He read aloud, shipment of volatile goods via rail spur, mile 11, property to be vacated before transport. Volatile, Mara said. You mean explosives? Ruth's silence was answer enough. Jonah turned toward her. Where are they shipping it? Before she could speak, gunfire cracked from outside. The window shattered. Jonah pulled Mara down behind the desk, glass raining around them. Ruth ducked beside them, eyes wide. Pike's men. He must have followed me. Jonah cursed under his breath, reached for the rifle. Through the broken window he saw two riders circling the cottonwood, smoke curling from their barrels. Basement, he ordered. Now! They scrambled down the stairs. Bullets punched through the walls, kicking dust. Jonah threw the metal chest aside and shoved a beam against the door. Mara pressed her back to the wall, panting. They'll burn us out. Jonah reloaded calmly. Not before I burn them first. Ruth's voice trembled. You don't understand. If they lose those papers, they'll bury this whole ridge. Jonah turned to her. Then we make sure the truth gets out first. The shots above stopped. Silence stretched. Too quiet to trust. Then came the crunch of boots on the floorboards. One man called out, Judge wants the girl. The Indian too, if he won't move. Jonah leaned close to Mara. You ready to move? Always. He lifted the trap door a sliver, enough to see the light. One man stood near the stairs, another at the window. Jonah counted their breaths. 1, 2. He pushed the door wide and fired. The blast threw dust and flame into the air. Mara rose behind him, pistol steady. The first man dropped. The second bolted through the window, vanishing into sunlight. Jonah slammed the trapdoor shut again. We're done here. He gathered the ledger, the map, and the letter, rolling them into his coat. Mara looked to Ruth, eyes hard. You ride with us. Ruth nodded, though the word tasted like surrender. They stepped out into the daylight. The wind carried the last echo of the whistle fading toward the south. Jonah looked down the track. That wasn't a freight train, he said. It was a test run. The air above mile 11 turned sharp with dust and silence. Jonah led the horses back through the brush, keeping low as the smoke from the gunfire thinned into the sky. The switch house stood crooked behind them, its windows blown out. Maps and papers swirling through the air like dying birds. They rode until the ridge flattened into hardpan. The sun dropped behind the hills, red as a wound. When they finally stopped, Mara slid from her saddle and sank to the ground. Her hands throbbed beneath the wrappings, pulse quick under the cloth. Ruth dismounted slowly, watching Jonah tie the horses. You planning to keep riding till morning? Depends who's behind us, he said. Pike won't chase tonight, Ruth muttered. He's counting bodies. Mara looked at her cousin. The face familiar but hollowed, like someone wearing old skin. You helped them burn our land, she said quietly. Ruth looked away. I thought I could control it, keep the rest safe. You thought wrong. Jonah watched from the shadows, saying nothing. The fire he'd built crackled between them, a thin circle of warmth in an ocean of dark. After a long silence, Ruth reached into her coat and pulled out a small cloth square, embroidered with red thread, her mother's handkerchief, once white. She tossed it into Mara's lap. Found that in Pike's camp. Figured you'd want it. Mara unfolded it. The red thread stopped halfway through her name, burned off at the edge. She stared at it a long moment, then folded it back. You don't get to trade pity for forgiveness. I'm not asking for forgiveness, Ruth said, just to stay alive long enough to see what's coming. Jonah stirred the fire. Then you'd better start talking. She took a slow breath. The judge isn't who he says he is. Name's Lucas Bell, lawyer from Tucson. He bought his title for $5 and a wagon of liquor. Mara frowned. So the courts? Fake, Ruth interrupted. Every deed he signed goes to White Crown Mining. He was paid to legalize their shipments, not to judge anyone. Jonah glanced toward Mara. Then the badge we found was worth less than the brass it's made of. Ruth nodded. They're moving munitions under the name Silver Ore. Explosives, rifles, everything stockpiled under your land. Mara's face hardened. And the key? Storage markers. Every mile post has a number. 24 is your father's property. Jonah leaned back, eyes half closed. A war buried under cornfields. Ruth's voice lowered. They'll come for that ledger. Without it, no one can prove a thing. Mara whispered. Then we keep it safe. Ruth shook her head. You don't understand. They'll burn towns before they let it reach the territory court. Jonah threw another stick into the fire. Sparks rose, vanishing into the dark. Then we stopped running. Stop? Ruth said. You can't fight a company. Can't fight an army either, Jonah said. Still did once. Mara looked at him. When? He didn't answer, only stared into the flames. The firelight traced the scar along his forearm. For a moment, she saw something raw behind his silence, a memory forged in the same heat. A low rumble drifted from the valley, like thunder too regular to be storm. Mara turned her head. Far away, faint lights crawled across the horizon. Train, Jonah said softly. They're running the line again. Ruth stood. We need to move. We need to rate slow. No, he said. We need to watch. They climbed the ridge above the camp. From there, they saw it clearly. A short train grinding slow across the old tracks. 2 engines, 3 cars, no lanterns lit. One car bore the mark WCM, White Crown Mining. Jonah watched it pass, jaw tight. They're hauling tonight. That means the judge is still nearby. Mara's hands clenched. Then we're not done. When the train vanished into the desert, they returned to the camp. The fire had died down, leaving only embers. Ruth sat apart, arms around her knees. "You ever think about home?" Mara asked quietly. Ruth didn't look up. "Home's just where the hurt started." Jonah rose, dusting off his coat. "Get some rest. At dawn we ride north." "Where?" Mara asked. "To Perdido," he said. "If Bell's moving weapons, he needs a depot." Ruth's eyes widened. "You'll walk into his hands." "Maybe," Jonah said, "but I'll choose where the hammer falls." He turned toward the dark, listening. The night was still, almost too still. Then came a sound from behind them, soft, deliberate. The creak of wood. Mara spun, eyes darting toward the old wagon they'd passed earlier. Something moved inside. Jonah lifted his rifle, slow and steady. He whispered, "We're not alone out here either." The dawn came red and mean. Clouds bruised the horizon like old blood. Jonah saddled the horses without a word, checking the rifle straps and the packs twice. Mara moved stiffly beside him, her hands wrapped fresh. Ruth lingered behind, silent, staring toward the east where the train had gone. They rode out through the canyon mouth as wind scraped through the mesquite. For a time, the only sound was hoofbeats on stone. Then, from the ridge above, came the faint echo of pursuit. Hooves again, faster this time. Jonah slowed, listening. 3 riders, Pike's men. Ruth looked back, fear thin in her voice. "They must have followed the smoke from our fire." Mara gritted her teeth. "Then we don't stop." They pushed the horses into the dry wash, a narrow cut through the rock where the river used to run. The walls rose steep on both sides, pale and slick. Dust swirled behind them, glowing gold in the morning light. Gunfire cracked from above. A bullet sparked off the stones near Mara's head. She ducked low against the saddle. Jonah shouted, "Keep to the bend! They can't shoot straight down!" They raced through the twisting path. The canyon narrowed until the horses were single file. Another shot rang, then another, both wide. Jonah glanced up, counting shadows on the rim. 3, he muttered. Pike's not with them. Ruth clung to her reins. "Then who's leading?" Mara answered flatly. "Doesn't matter." They came to a shallow bridge, nothing more than a plank of timber across a gap in the wash. Jonah's eyes flicked to the supports, old, cracked, held by 2 stakes hammered deep into the clay. He dismounted fast, drew his knife, and cut one of the ropes loose. "Go," he ordered. "Ride." Mara crossed first, the boards groaning beneath her weight. Ruth followed close, panic snapping in her breath. Jonah waited until the riders appeared at the far bend, guns glinting. Then he fired once, not at them, but at the plank. The bridge split with a sound like thunder. The first pursuer went down in a blur of dust and hooves. The others pulled back hard, shouting curses that bounced down the canyon walls. Mara reined in her horse on the far side. You could have killed them. Jonah mounted again. Didn't need to. The canyon will finish the job. Ruth wiped dust from her face. You think they'll quit now? No, Jonah said. But they'll think twice. They rode on until the wash opened into a flat stretch of shale. The sun burned hot already. Mara's horse stumbled. She steadied it, grimacing as her bandages darkened. Jonah saw the blood. You're bleeding through. I'll manage. He slowed his pace. You don't have to. I said I'll manage. Her tone left no room for mercy. Jonah nodded once and kept riding. By midday, they reached an old water tower beside the tracks. The structure leaned, half collapsed, but the shade beneath offered a moment's rest. They dismounted. Ruth collapsed against a post, breathing hard. Jonah scanned the horizon. Nothing moved except heat. We can't stay long. Mara crouched by the base of the tower. Something half-buried caught her eye. A rail marker, number burned into the wood. 23. She brushed the dust away. We're close. Ruth asked. Close to what? To whatever 24 was hiding. Jonah followed her gaze. The tracks stretched north, shimmering in the heat, ending at a bend carved into the hills. Beyond that, silence. Suddenly a shot rang from behind them. The bullet tore through the tower's leg, sending splinters flying. Jonah spun, rifle up. 3 figures appeared at the canyon's mouth, dusty, furious, alive. The ones who'd survived the bridge. Pitch. Damn, Jonah muttered. Persistent. Ruth screamed, diving behind the rocks. Mara grabbed the pistol from her saddlebag. Her hands shook, but she lifted it anyway. Jonah fired once, dropping the led horse. The canyon filled with echoes. Another rider returned fire. A round clipped the tower's rim. Jonah looked up. The whole structure groaned. It's coming down! He grabbed Mara's arm and pulled her clear as the tower collapsed, raining beams and dust. The noise swallowed the gunfire. When it cleared, the riders were gone, vanished into the glare. Mara coughed through the haze. You think they're dead? Jonah checked the ground. No, just buried in pride. Ruth peered from behind the rocks, trembling. We can't keep outrunning them. Jonah slung his rifle. We're not. We're heading where they don't want us. Where's that? Perdido. Mara frowned. Why there? He looked down the empty rails stretching toward the horizon. Because if Bell's hiding the truth, that's where he's keeping it. As they mounted again, thunder rumbled somewhere beyond the ridge, too steady for weather. Jonah glanced skyward. The sound came from iron wheels, not clouds. The train, Mara said. They're moving faster now. Jonah nodded grimly. Then so do we. They rode into the shimmering heat, 3 silhouettes swallowed by the dust, chasing the sound of judgment rolling down the line. Night fell hard on the desert. The air turned brittle, snapping like glass under each gust of wind. Jonah found the ruined chapel by accident. A skeleton of stone walls and a half-collapsed steeple. roof long gone. It sat in the hollow like a grave waiting to be named. They led the horses inside the broken gate. The place smelled of sage, dust, and old prayers. A cracked cross leaned against the altar, still stained with soot. Ruth hesitated at the doorway. "You think God still listens here?" Jonah tied his horse to a beam. "If he ever did." Mara lowered herself onto a pew, wincing as her hands brushed the wood. "It's quiet enough for ghosts." "Ghosts don't bother me," Jonah said. "Living men do." He built a small fire in what had once been the aisle. The flames painted the walls gold, catching the edges of shattered glass. Mara watched the sparks dance up toward the hole where the roof used to be. After a long silence, Jonah said, "We need a plan before Pike finds our trail again." Ruth hugged her knees. "You can't fight Pike or Bell. They own the law now." Jonah looked into the fire. "Law and justice ain't twins. Sometimes they don't even speak." Mara stared at the flames, lost in memory. "They broke my hands so I couldn't sign. Thought that would make it easy to erase me." Jonah said softly, "Looks like you're still here." From the far shadows came a sound, slow steps on stone. Mara reached for her pistol, but Jonah lifted a hand. A man stepped into the light, unarmed, coat heavy with dust. His beard was streaked white, eyes dark and sunken. A cross hung from his neck. "Father Malloy," Jonah said, voice flat. The priest nodded once. "Didn't expect you to remember." "I remember everyone who leaves a mark," Jonah replied. Malloy looked at the fire. "You left one too." Mara's eyes narrowed. "You two know each other?" Jonah didn't answer. The priest spoke instead. "He was a scout once, for the army. I blessed the dead he brought in from the frontier." Jonah's jaw tightened. "Enough of that." Mara rose slowly. "What do you want, Father?" Malloy took a small leather satchel from his shoulder and dropped it near the fire. Papers spilled out, letters stamped with the crest of White Crown Mining. "Answers," he said, "and maybe a chance to bury my sins." Ruth leaned forward. "You worked for them too?" "For a time." He crouched by the fire, rubbing his hands. "They told me it was mining rights. Said the land would bring jobs. I signed their papers. Then the explosion at the freight yard killed 14 men. One was my son." The fire snapped. Mara flinched at the sound. Malloy went on, voice rough. "When I tried to speak, Bell paid me to keep quiet. The same money built this church." Jonah's stare didn't soften. "You coming clean now because you found God?" Malloy met his eyes. "No, because I found what they're hauling under her land." He reached into the satchel and pulled out a metal seal, its emblem scarred but readable. The Territorial Ordnance Department. Mara frowned. "Military?" Malloy nodded. "Not silver. Ammunition. Shells and powder bound for the border. They're using the mining company as a mask." Jonah's voice dropped low. "A government line running through private land." "Illegal," Mara said. "Profitable," Ruth added. Malloy handed the seal to Jonah. Rate slow. With that, the ledger becomes proof. Bell can't hide behind his robe anymore. Jonah turned the seal in the firelight. Why give it to us? The priest looked at Mara. Because she's the only one left who hasn't sold her soul for coin. Mara's eyes burned in the reflection of the flames. And you? I already sold mine, he said. I'm just buying a headstone for what's left. Outside, the wind picked up. The chapel groaned. Dust fell from the rafters. Ruth whispered, "We can't stay here. If Pike's tracking by smoke, he'll come," Jonah interrupted. "He always does." Malloy stood, his silhouette a shadow against the glowing cross. Then take this seal and make it mean something. Don't let it die in the dirt like the rest of us. Jonah pocketed the seal. You coming with us? Malloy shook his head. I'll slow them down. Mara stepped forward. You'll die. He smiled faintly. Maybe that's the point. Jonah stared at him for a long moment, then nodded once. You do what you have to. Malloy turned toward the door. The fire threw his shadow long across the stone. As he stepped into the night, he whispered a prayer that no one could hear. Minutes later, far off, gunshots cracked. 2, then 3. Jonah stoked the fire higher. The seal gleamed in his hand, heavy as guilt. By dawn, the wind had turned. The smell of gunpowder still drifted from the south, faint as a dying fire. Jonah stood outside the ruined chapel, staring toward the horizon. He didn't say a word. The metal seal from Malloy's satchel gleamed on the table beside the ashes. Mara tightened the strap on her coat, eyes hollow. You think he's gone? Jonah nodded once. He bought us time. That's all he meant to buy. Ruth stood apart, arms folded. We shouldn't have let him stay. Mara turned sharply. He made his choice. Ruth's mouth twisted. So did I. Look how that turned out. Jonah packed the ledger, the seal, and the maps into his saddlebag. We ride for Perdido. Bell won't expect us to come to him. Ruth muttered, or he's waiting for it. Jonah cinched the bag tight. Doesn't matter. Truth doesn't travel by permission. They mounted and rode north. The trail cut through long stretches of cracked clay where no grass grew. The sun climbed high, brutal and white. Hours passed before they reached the shadow of the ridge again. Mara rode beside Jonah, voice low. You ever think about turning back? He kept his eyes on the trail. Turn back to what? She didn't answer. The wind filled the silence for her. By midday, the outline of Perdido appeared, its station roof glinting like a knife edge, the smokestack of the forge rising behind. Mara stared at it, remembering her father's boots on the platform, her mother's hands red from dust and seed, ghosts waiting where the tracks ended. They stopped a mile short of town, resting the horses in a dry gully. Jonah handed Mara the seal. You hold it. If I fall, you run it to the telegraph office. Send it east. She took it, surprised by its weight. You think we'll get that far? Jonah looked toward the horizon. Think we'll try. A twig snapped behind them. Jonah spun, rifle half raised. Ruth stood there, breathing hard, clutching a bundle of papers. "I went back," she said, "to Pike's camp." Mara's eyes narrowed. "Why?" "Because you'll need this." She tossed the bundle down, pages from the ledger, edges charred. Jonah crouched, scanning the sheets. "Where'd you get these?" "Pike kept them in his tent. I took them when they were sleeping." Mara frowned. "And they just let you walk away?" Ruth hesitated, eyes flicking down. "Not exactly." Blood darkened her sleeve. She pressed it against her side. Jonah's tone went flat. "You led them here." "No," she started, but the words died. Gunfire cracked from the ridge. Dirt jumped near their boots. Jonah shoved Mara down behind the horses. "You did." Ruth's face twisted in pain. "I didn't mean to. They followed." "You mean you left the trail wide open," Jonah said. More shots, the sound of hooves closing in. Ruth stumbled behind a boulder, clutching her wound. "They want the ledger, not you." Mara's voice was cold. "They already took everything else." Jonah fired once up the ridge, forcing the riders back. "We move," he said. "Now." Ruth shook her head. "You can't outrun them. Pike's men know this country better than any of us." Jonah's reply was cold iron. "Then they'll die on familiar ground." He grabbed the reins, pulled Mara up. Ruth tried to mount, failed. Blood smeared her fingers. Mara hesitated. "We can't leave her. Time 400 mounds." Jonah looked at the horizon, the smoke curling from the town beyond. She made her bed in ashes. Ruth gasped, "I'm not asking for mercy, just a chance to fix it." She held out one of the burned pages. "There's a name on this one, Malloy's. They forged his handwriting to bless Bell's contracts. If the court sees it, they'll hang him for perjury instead of us." Jonah took the page, scanned the signature. "And where's Pike?" "Following the river bend," she said. "He'll be here by sundown." Mara knelt beside her cousin. "You can still come." Ruth shook her head weakly. "I can't ride." Jonah reloaded the rifle. "Then pray you can hide." He looked to Mara. "Perdido by nightfall. That's the only way this ends." Mara nodded, eyes wet but fierce. She squeezed Ruth's shoulder once. Neither affection nor anger, just finality. Then she mounted. Ruth watched them disappear into the glare. The wind lifted the ash from her lap, scattering the last fragments of the burned ledger into the desert. When the echo of hooves faded, she leaned back against the stone, whispering, "Make it mean something." Far off, thunder rolled, the steady rhythm of a train approaching. Perdido lay ahead like a scar carved into the desert. The town was half asleep under the haze of dusk, the horizon bruised purple. Smoke drifted from chimneys, mingling with the iron tang of rail grease. Jonah and Mara rode in along the old wagon trail, dust clinging to their coats. They didn't speak. The weight of what they carried, the ledger, the seal, and the half-burned pages, was heavier than any bullet. The station came into view. A single platform, a rusted sign swinging in the wind, Perdido siding faintly etched across it. Near the end of the tracks stood the forge Jonah once tended before the war, now cold, its chimney cracked. Mara whispered, "He's here." Jonah nodded. "Bell's too proud to run. Pike will bring him the news. We bring him the truth." They dismounted, tethering the horses in the alley past the freight house. Jonah loaded his rifle. Mara checked the pistol with shaking hands. "You sure you can shoot?" he asked. "I can pull a trigger." He almost smiled. "Then pull it only if you must." Inside the station, lanterns flickered against the windows. 3 men stood by the telegraph office. Pike's crew, the survivors from the canyon. Their coats were clean now, their faces not. Jonah moved first. He crossed the platform and slammed one man into the wall before the others could draw. Gunfire split the silence. 2 shots, then a third. When the echoes died, the station master's clock ticked on like nothing had happened. Mara stepped over the bodies, breathing fast. "You could have warned me." Jonah wiped his rifle barrel. "Wouldn't have mattered." They slipped into the telegraph room. Inside, Nora Vale, the barkeep from the Tin Finch, sat by the window, lighting a lamp. She looked up and froze. "Jonah," she said, "didn't think you'd crawl back from the dead." Rate slow. "Neither did I." Her eyes darted to Mara. "You brought trouble." "Trouble's already here." Nora nodded slowly, her hand brushing the telegraph key. "Bell's in the yard. Train's due any minute. He's loading crates labeled silver ore." Mara stepped forward. "Explosives." Nora raised an eyebrow. "Then you came to stop him, not to watch." Jonah looked through the window. Beyond the platform, lanterns moved like fireflies around a short freight train. Men in uniform worked fast, stacking wooden boxes onto the cars. Beside them stood a tall figure in a long coat, his white gloves visible even in the dark. "Bell." Jonah said, "We'll need the siding switch." Nora smirked. "Still works if you know the code." She opened a drawer and tossed him a ring of keys. 3 turns right, 2 left. Bell won't see it till it's too late. He took the keys, nodding once. "You don't have to stay." She shrugged. "Maybe I want to see what justice looks like when it bleeds." They moved quickly. Nora went to cut the signal light. Mara climbed to the top of the coal tower, watching the yard through the smoke. Jonah headed for the switch lever near the end of the platform. The night thrummed with the distant whistle of the incoming train. Pike appeared first, riding hard down the main street. Dust trailed behind him like a banner. He dismounted near Bell, shouting something lost in the wind. Bell's posture stiffened. His hand rose, pointing toward the depot. Jonah gritted his teeth. "They know." He yanked the lever anyway. The switch clanked into place, the tracks bending toward the unused spur behind the freight yard. The whistle screamed. The train roared in, iron wheels screaming on steel. It hit the junction at full speed, sparks flying. The front car lurched onto the spur. One of the guards shouted, waving his lantern. Too late. "Time now hums." The cars bucked, then shuddered to a stop. Crates tumbled open, spilling their contents. Rifles, powder kegs, and mortar shells gleaming under the lantern light. Bell's face turned gray. "Cover it!" he shouted. Jonah stepped out of the shadows, rifle in hand. "Hard to cover daylight." Bell spun. "You don't know what you're doing." "I know exactly what I'm doing," Jonah said. Mara descended the tower ladder, pistol drawn. "Here's your silver, Judge." Bell's voice cracked. "You'll hang for this." Jonah chambered around. "Then I'll hang the truth beside me." From behind Bell, Pike lit a match, his grin thin as wire. "Let's see justice burn." He flicked it toward a shattered keg leaking powder. Jonah fired. The match burst in midair, flames scattering harmlessly. Pike staggered back, hand bleeding. "End of the line," Jonah said. But Pike only laughed, pulling another match. Before he could strike, the powder caught from the sparks of the train's wheels. A sudden flash lit the yard. Bell screamed for his men to douse it, but it was too late. The fuse line burned quick toward the crates. Jonah grabbed Mara's arm. "Run!" They dove behind the coal tower as the first explosion ripped through the siding. Fire roared up, devouring the freight yard in a bloom of orange light. Crates flew, metal screamed, and the night filled with thunder. The blast shook the desert to its bones. Flames clawed at the sky, red and furious, painting Perdido in bloodlight. The freight yard was a ruin of twisted iron and shattered timber. Smoke rolled over the station like a black tide. Jonah coughed through it, pulling Mara to her feet. "You alive?" he asked. "Enough," she rasped. Her ears rang, her coat scorched. Sparks rained around them, each one hissing against the wet ground. Because at last, the rain had come. Thunder cracked overhead. The storm swept in fast, wind bending the flames sideways. Jonah blinked through the downpour. "Pike?" "Gone," she said. "No," he murmured. "Not yet." Across the burning yard, Pike staggered from the wreckage, coat aflame, clutching a revolver. Behind him, Lucas Bell crawled out from beneath a collapsed crate, face smeared with ash, eyes wild. He saw Jonah and screamed, "Murderer!" Jonah leveled his rifle. "Truth's heavier than bullets, Judge." Bell spat blood. "You think anyone will believe you? This town works for me." Jonah's answer came cold. "Not anymore." The rain fell harder. People began to gather on the edge of the street. Miners, shopkeepers, the saloon's barkeepers. Nora among them, holding a lantern under her coat to shield the flame. "Jonah!" she shouted through the wind. "You've got witnesses now. Don't waste it." Pike raised his revolver, aiming at Mara. Jonah saw it a half-second too late. Pike fired. The bullet grazed her shoulder, spinning her backward. Jonah fired back. Pike dropped to his knees, clutching his gut, still laughing, even as the rain washed the blood from his chin. "You can't stop him," Pike gasped. "Bell's got a dozen more just like me." Jonah stepped closer, rifle steady. "Then they'll all hear his trial from the gallows." Pike tried to lift his gun again. Jonah didn't let him finish. One clean shot ended it. The thunder swallowed the sound. Bell crawled backward, palms slipping in the mud. "You'll hang," he cried again. "You think they'll let an Apache speak law?" Jonah looked down at him, rain streaking through the soot on his face. Law's your word. Justice is mine. Mara pushed herself upright, blood dripping down her sleeve. We end it now, before more die. She walked to the wreckage of the train, grabbed the satchel Jonah had dropped. Inside lay the ledger, soaked but legible, and Malloy's seal. She held them high so all could see. "This is what they burned for," she shouted into the storm. "Your sons, your wages, your land, all sold for their guns and greed." Belle tried to rise, but Nora stepped forward, lantern light catching her eyes. "She's telling the truth," she said. "I saw the crates myself." Others nodded. Murmurs spread through the crowd, anger crackling under the thunder. Jonah turned to Belle. "You still want to talk law? Let's give you a jury." Two men from the crowd seized Belle by the arms, dragging him toward the depot platform. He fought, shouting names of officials, threats of soldiers, until someone shoved him into the wall. His fine coat tore, revealing the false badge beneath. Nora stepped beside Jonah. "You want to end this clean?" Jonah's voice was low. "Clean as rain allows." She raised the lantern toward the crowd. "Get the telegraph running. Send word east. Evidence coming with witnesses." Jonah nodded. "Mara, the seal." She placed it into Nora's hand. "Don't lose it. It's heavier than it looks." Belle shouted, "This isn't over." Jonah's eyes met his. "No, Judge. It's finally started." Lightning split the sky. The light hit the station clock, freezing the moment in white glare. Belle's reflection flickered across the wet platform, small, cornered, mortal. Mara staggered beside Jonah. "You shot me, remember?" He looked at her bandaged shoulder. "You'll live." She smiled faintly through the pain. "That's what you said the night we met." Rain washed the blood from the boards, hissing against the cooling metal. The freight fire dimmed to embers. Nora climbed onto the platform, telegraph wire sparking to life under her hand. Jonah turned toward the town's edge. "It's done," he said softly. Mara shook her head. "Not yet." Belle's still breathing. He lowered his rifle. "Let him. The court'll finish what we started." Belle glared up at them through the rain. "You think a courtroom will change anything?" Mara met his eyes. "No, but the truth already did." Thunder rolled once more, deep and final. The storm washed Perdido clean. Weeks bled into months, and Perdido settled under a quieter sky. The desert mended itself the only way it knew, slowly, with wind and silence. Where the spur had once cut through the ridge, grass began to sprout between the rails left half buried in dust. The tracks no longer sang. They only shimmered in the sun, half swallowed by sand, like bones after a storm. Jonah rebuilt the forge with his own hands. No blueprints, no help. Just timber hauled from the freight yard, and bricks scavenged from the church ruins. When it stood again, the chimney leaned slightly, and the roof rattled when the wind came down from the hills, but the fire burned clean. The first morning smoke rose from that chimney. The townsfolk stopped to watch. They said the sound of hammer on steel was the heart of Perdido waking up again. Mara watched from the porch of the small cabin they now shared, a house patched together from the remains of her father's barn. Her shoulder had healed, though the scar still ached in cold weather. The bandages were gone, but the scars on her palms ran deep, pale seams over darker skin. Sometimes they caught the light like silver thread. Jonah stood at the anvil, sleeves rolled, hammer steady. Sparks leapt around him and vanished into the morning. He moved with patience, never rushing, never wasting motion. The rhythm of his strikes was different from before, less fury, more heartbeat. When he finally paused, he set a small piece of glowing steel on the bench. Mara stepped closer, brushing dust from her skirt. "What are you making?" He didn't look up. "A brace for you. I told you. I don't need one anymore." He placed the steel back in the fire. "Then it's not for need. It's for remembering." The flames roared brighter. Mara leaned in the doorway, watching the heat ripple the air. "Seems like all this country does is remember." Jonah's hammer fell once, ringing loud. "Then we should decide what it remembers of us." Outside, the wind shifted, bringing the faint smell of rain still clinging to the ridge. It carried the faraway sound of a bell, Nora's handbell, from the saloon now called the Raised Wing. After the storm, Nora had reopened with money the townsfolk gathered together. She poured whiskey slower now, laughed louder, and rang that bell every night at closing. She said it reminded her that justice sometimes came late, but it still came. Mara stepped outside with a pail of water and looked down toward town. From this distance, Perdido seemed smaller, quiet, almost peaceful. A freight wagon rattled by, carrying lumber instead of guns. The telegraph line hummed faintly, carrying new stories east. "Funny," she said, "all the noise we made just to make this silence." Jonah leaned in the doorway. "Silence is what comes after you've said enough." She smiled. "You think Belle will hang?" "Doesn't matter how. The truth's the rope either way." They fell quiet again. The kind of quiet that doesn't need filling. Later that week, Ruth came down from the hills. She rode a mule, slower than before, pale from fever. Mara saw her first, standing in the yard. Ruth dismounted carefully, her right hand pressed against her side. "Didn't think you'd still be here," Ruth said. Mara crossed her arms. "Didn't think you'd still alive." Ruth gave a small, tired smile. "Neither did I." Jonah appeared in the forge doorway. "You riding through or staying?" "Neither. Just returning something." She drew a folded handkerchief, the one embroidered with red thread, burned off halfway through Mara's name, and placed it on the anvil table. "Thought maybe you'd want to finish it," Ruth said softly. Mara stared a long time. "You want forgiveness?" "No, just to know it's possible." Silence stretched until Ruth turned away. "You were right about one thing," she said, rate, slow. Blood remembers. She mounted the mule and rode toward the west, vanishing into the light. When the dust settled, Jonah spoke. "You gonna finish it?" Mara unfolded the handkerchief. "Maybe not with thread." She set it beside the forge tools. Maybe I'll carve it instead. That night, Jonah worked late. The anvil sang long after the stars came out. Mara sat nearby, humming an old tune her mother used to sing while planting corn. When Jonah finished, he held out a small steel feather, thin, polished, gleaming. "It's the brace," he said, "or what's left of it." She turned it in her hands. It caught the forge light and threw it back like dawn over water. "You made this from the nails they used on me." He nodded. "Iron remembers pain. So does steel. Difference is what you do with it next." She placed the feather on the shelf beside two other relics, the brass key marked 24 and the bent badge of the false judge. Truth, deceit, and rebirth, 3 weights keeping the wall from falling. Jonah poured coffee for them both and sat on the steps outside. The moon rose silver, the air thick with the smell of sage. Mara sipped, staring at the horizon. "You ever wonder if we're just ghosts keeping each other company?" Jonah considered it. "If we are, it's a better haunting than most." They laughed quietly, a sound too small for the wide desert, but enough for them. A week later, she built a small garden beside the forge. Onion shoots poked through the dirt, stubborn and green. Jonah helped her dig the trench, his hands black with soot and soil. "Never figured you for a farmer," he said. "Never figured you for a preacher," she shot back. He smiled. "Guess we're both something new." As twilight fell, she lit a small lantern inside the forge. Its glow stretched across the ground like a path. Jonah struck, his hammer once, a sound clear as a church bell. Nora's bell answered faintly from town, the two echoes folding together over the basin. Mara looked toward the sound. "That's the same bell I heard the night I ran." Jonah nodded. "Then maybe it wasn't warning you. Maybe it was calling you home." She tested the word for weight. "Home." He met her gaze. "You made it." The wind carried the smell of rain again, soft and clean. Somewhere beyond the ridge, the riverbeds whispered under the moonlight, promising water when the next storm came. Mara reached for his hand, the same hand that had lifted her from the dirt months ago. The scars on their palms brushed, rough against rough, forming something that felt like peace. Jonah said quietly, "The forge remembers what it tempers." Mara smiled, looking into the flames. "Then let it remember us kindly." The fire cracked, sending one last shower of sparks into the night. The desert answered with silence, the kind that means survival, not absence. By morning, Perdido would wake again to the sound of steel meeting steel, the same rhythm that began it all. But for now, the hammer rested, the fire breathed low, and the woman who had once run from everything finally stood still. Thank you, friends, for staying with us through the journey of Mara Keene and Jonah Red Elk. 2 souls who found strength, forgiveness, and home in a land that tried to break them. Their story reminds us, even in the harshest deserts of life, we can still forge something lasting from pain. Kindness, courage, and hope. If this tale touched your heart or stirred a memory from your own life, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment. Tell us what this story made you remember or how it spoke to you. If you enjoyed this story, please like, share it with someone who loves the Old West, and subscribe to our channel. We post new Western tales every week, stories of endurance, love, and the quiet heroes who built their own justice under open skies. And don't forget to turn on the notification bell so you'll never miss another story around our campfire. Thank you for being part of this growing circle of listeners. Until next time, may your days be calm, your nights peaceful, and your spirit unbroken, like the forge that always remembers the fire.